My name is Ella Monroe, and I'm 28 years old. I never thought I'd be standing in my own kitchen watching my family take a group photo while I was asked to step out of the frame. I stood there holding the tray of food I'd just spent hours preparing. "Can you move a little? You're blocking the light," my mother said, without even looking at me. I stepped back. Quiet. Invisible. No one noticed. No one cared. I used to think that if I just tried harder, they'd see me, love me, want me. But the truth? Some families don't want you to belong. Before I tell you the rest, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments, hit like if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, and subscribe if you're ready for stories about finding strength where you thought there was only silence. I don't remember the last time anyone in my family called me by my name. Around here, I'm just the one who makes sure things get done. Groceries don't magically appear. The floors don't mop themselves, and someone has to take notes for Dad's weekly business meetings at the kitchen table. That someone is always me. Every morning, I wake up before the sun and start the routine. Coffee brewing, eggs sizzling. Dad likes them over easy. Mom prefers boiled with salt and lemon. Vanessa, my younger sister, doesn't eat breakfast, unless it's from that trendy bakery downtown, and only if it's delivered. Still, I always set a place for her at the table. Habit, I guess. She rarely comes downstairs before noon. Sometimes I think of myself as background music in this house. Present, but not heard. Essential, but never noticed. They live their lives around me like I'm furniture. Useful, but forgettable. Last week I scrubbed the guest bathroom for 2 hours before Mom's book club arrived. I even ironed the cloth napkins. Yes, cloth. Because she said her reputation mattered. When the guests arrived, she smiled and told them, "It's exhausting doing it all yourself." I stood in the kitchen drying my hands on my apron, invisible. I wasn't always this invisible. I remember when I was 8 and got straight A's on my report card. I ran home, excited, ready to show Dad. But when I opened the front door, Vanessa had already beaten me to it. Literally, she broke her arm falling off her bike. The whole house was in chaos. Mom was crying. Dad was rushing to the car. I stood there with my perfect grades, clutching the paper forgotten. That moment never left me. Vanessa always knew how to take up space. She was beautiful, charming, loud in the way people find endearing. Teachers adored her. Family friends called her a star. She didn't have to try. She just had to exist. I, on the other hand, had to earn everything, and even then it was never enough. My dad, Martin, is the kind of man who thinks emotions are a weakness. If you cried in front of him, he'd say, "Wipe your face and fix the problem." He built his company from the ground up and expects everyone else to hustle just as hard, but only if you're the son he never had. My mom, Helena, is obsessed with appearances. Her garden is perfect. Her Instagram is curated. Her family photos, always color-coordinated and carefully cropped. I'm usually holding the camera. And then there's Vanessa, the golden child. She's 3 years younger but somehow 10 years ahead in their eyes. She gets praise for showing up, while I get silence for holding everything together. I've been the unofficial assistant in Dad's company for 4 years now. No title, no pay. I schedule meetings, proofread contracts, even make coffee for his clients. He says, "You're learning. This is experience." But I've been learning for nearly half a decade. Sometimes I wonder if I disappeared, would anyone notice? Would the trash take itself out? Would the linens fold themselves? Would anyone call to ask if I was okay? But I stay. I do what's needed. I tell myself it's loyalty, that one day someone will finally say thank you. That day has never come. And deep down, I've stopped expecting it. It was a Thursday afternoon when I overheard the conversation that would change everything. Dad was in the living room with Mom. I had just come home from picking up his dry cleaning, balancing 2 bags of groceries in my arms, and was about to head upstairs when I heard my name. Not lovingly, not even neutrally, just flat and dismissive. "She doesn't know how to handle anything real," Dad said. "She's soft. She's just background support." I froze behind the staircase wall. "We can't give her control of the company," Mom replied. "She'll collapse under pressure. Vanessa is the obvious choice." "Of course," Dad agreed. "Ella's just not trustworthy, not sharp enough. Vanessa was always the one who understood the big picture." They said it like it was settled, like I was a burden they'd politely tolerated until Vanessa was ready to step in and take over everything. I didn't cry. I stood there quietly, staring at the cracks in the wooden floorboards under my feet. They used to creak when I ran through the house as a little girl, back when I believed I was loved the same. I went upstairs, put the groceries away, hung up the dry cleaning. Then I sat on my bed for hours, staring at the wall. That night, they posted a family photo on Mom's Instagram. Another polished, curated lie, matching outfits, laughter, captioned, "Grateful for these three, my whole heart." I wasn't in the photo. I took the photo, as usual. I guess I thought it would hurt less if I expected it, but hearing them say it out loud, that I didn't matter, that I didn't belong, cut deeper than silence ever did. They weren't just forgetting me. They were rewriting me out of their story. That night, I opened my bottom drawer. Inside was a small, hand-carved wooden box with faded gold hinges. My grandmother Lorraine gave it to me when I turned 18. She said, "When you feel like you've lost your voice, open this. It'll remind you who you are." I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were old letters, her perfume still lingering faintly on the paper, and a photo of us sitting on the porch the summer before she died. She always wore the same straw hat and called me her quiet fire, but tucked beneath the letters, folded neatly in a navy envelope I'd never seen before, was a note written in her unmistakable cursive. "Ella, if you're reading this, then I'm probably gone. But I need you to know, I saw you. Every quiet act of love, every time you put others first. That is not weakness. That is strength most people never understand. One day, the truth will rise, and when it does, I need you to be ready. With all my heart, Grandma Lorraine." I read the letter twice, 3 times. Then I just held it to my chest. She had seen me, when no one else ever really did. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel crazy for wanting more. I didn't feel selfish for wondering why I always had to shrink myself so others could shine. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind that night as I lay awake staring at the ceiling. One day, the truth will rise. I didn't know what that meant then, but I would soon. And when it came, it wouldn't just rise, it would shatter everything. The attic had always smelled like cedar and dust. It was the one place in the house that hadn't been micromanaged by my mother's obsession with decor. Up there, things were just left alone, forgotten, just like me. It started with a light bulb that needed changing in the upstairs hallway. That's what Mom said. "Ella, would you mind checking the fixture? I think it's flickering again." "No, please. No, thank you." Just an errand passed down like a baton in a relay no one else wanted to run. While searching for the step stool, I noticed an old trunk shoved behind the winter coats in the hallway closet. I hadn't seen that trunk in years. Something about it stopped me cold. It used to belong to Grandma Lorraine. She moved in with us briefly after her stroke. The trunk came with her, always locked, always just a little out of reach. After she passed, it vanished into the attic and, like so many things tied to her, was never mentioned again. I dragged it out carefully, my heart thudding louder than I'd admit. The brass latch clicked open with a sound that felt both familiar and final. Inside, everything was exactly how I remembered her, neat, deliberate, and meaningful. There was a blue shawl she always wore in the evenings, a cracked leather journal, a silver locket with my baby picture tucked inside. I sat on the floor and let the memories flood in, her laugh, her humming while knitting, the smell of chamomile and cinnamon in her tea. And then I saw it. A sealed folder with my name written on the tab in her handwriting. My full name. Not Sweetie or Kiddo or Helper, just Ella Monroe. As if she were speaking directly to the adult I was becoming. I opened it slowly. The first page was a notarized copy of her last updated will. Not the one Mom and Dad always referred to, the version that left everything to the family. This one was different, it was newer, and it was clear. To Ella Monroe, I leave. 51% ownership of Monroe and Company, the rental property portfolio in Cambridge. My personal investment fund, formerly held jointly with Richard Monroe, trust fund #67A containing $1.2 million, USD. I blinked, read it again. My grandmother had made me the primary heir. Not Vanessa, not the family. Me. Behind the will was a typed letter addressed to Gareth T. Langley, someone I didn't know yet. She wrote about ensuring Ella's protection and contingency protocols if the family attempts to suppress her rights. My fingers trembled. I looked around the attic, half expecting someone to burst in and accuse me of stealing. But it was silent. Only the sound of an old fan humming through the wall and the occasional creak of the house settling around me. I should have felt triumphant, angry, empowered. But all I felt in that moment was something deeper, something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Belief. Someone had believed in me, truly, deeply, and without conditions. Grandma Lorraine had seen through the chaos, the favoritism, the invisible lines drawn inside our family. She'd seen what I'd built, what I'd carried, what I'd sacrificed. And instead of dismissing it like everyone else, she'd honored it. Tears welled up, not from grief, but from quiet relief. The kind that comes when the world finally hands you back a truth you've known all along. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't disposable, I was never invisible to her, and now I had the proof. Not just in words, but in legacy. I couldn't sleep that night. The attic felt like another world, like I'd stepped out of the version of reality my parents had carefully constructed and into something truer, something mine. I kept the folder with me, tucked under my mattress like a secret I wasn't ready to say out loud. But the name kept playing in my head like a melody I hadn't heard in years. Gareth T. Langley. It sounded like a name from a legal drama. Serious. British, maybe. I didn't know who he was, but if Grandma Lorraine trusted him with something as important as her final wishes, I needed to find him. The next morning, I waited until Dad and Vanessa left for a meeting and Mom was at her Pilates class. I pulled out my laptop and started digging. It didn't take long. Gareth Langley was a senior partner at a boutique law firm downtown, specialized in trusts, estates, and, ironically, family mediation. His profile picture showed a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a slight, knowing smile. I stared at the screen for a while before dialing the number. A woman answered on the second ring. "Langley and Pierce? How may I direct your call?" "Hi," I said. "My name is Ella Monroe. I believe Mr. Langley handled the estate of my grandmother, Lorraine Monroe. I found a letter she wrote to him, and I was wondering if I could speak to him directly." There was a pause. Then she said, "Hold, please." My heart raced. My hands were ice. After what felt like hours, a warm, measured voice came on the line. "Miss Monroe," he said, "I've been expecting your call." I didn't know what to say. I must have gone quiet for too long because he chuckled gently. "Your grandmother had a very strong sense of timing," he continued. "She told me you'd come to me when you were ready. I assume you've read the addendum?" "Yes," I whispered. "I didn't even know it existed until yesterday." "There's a lot your family didn't want you to know," he said, calm but firm. "But Lorraine made sure you were protected. Everything in that will is legally binding, and your access to the trust and company shares can be enacted at any time." "Wait," I said. "You mean right now?" "Yes," he replied. "If you choose to, or you can wait. But just know, it's yours, all of it." I hung up, sat back and let the words echo in my head. It's yours, all of it. For years I'd been made to feel like a squatter in my own home, like I had to earn every scrap of kindness, every nod of approval. And now, here was a stranger, someone who'd never met me, telling me that I owned more of the family legacy than the people who had spent their lives erasing me from it. I wasn't ready to storm in and declare myself anything, but I wasn't going to pretend anymore either. That afternoon, I drove past Monroe and Company, the company Dad built with blood and ego. I parked across the street and watched as Vanessa strutted out in her heels, talking on the phone, laughing like she had the world in her palm. She didn't know it yet. None of them did. But the balance had shifted. I wasn't the help. I wasn't the shadow. I was the rightful heir. And I had a name they couldn't erase. Something shifted in me after that call with Gareth Langley. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, like the sound a door makes when it finally clicks shut behind you. I didn't yell. I didn't confront anyone. I planned. For the first time in years, I let myself step back and really see the people around me. Not with the soft lens of hope, but with clarity. And what I saw made me furious. Vanessa, for example, strutted through our house like a queen. But I started noticing the packages. So many of them. Designer shoes, custom handbags, furniture she didn't need for the apartment she rarely stayed in. At first I thought it was just reckless spending, but then I remembered the company's credit card bill I'd filed last month. The charges lined up a little too perfectly. I started keeping records, quietly, meticulously. Each time Vanessa placed an order, I checked the receipts. If she swiped Dad's corporate card for another pair of limited edition boots, I took screenshots. I compiled dates, vendors, totals. I wasn't just collecting proof, I was building a case. Dad, meanwhile, had recently restructured parts of the business. His words, He claimed it was to streamline operations, but I remembered hearing something about a second bank account, offshore, when I passed by his home office late one night. So I started watching. He left paperwork lying around like breadcrumbs, assuming, as always, that no one would think to follow. I did. And what I found wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. He'd been funneling money from Monroe and Company into a private holding company under a false name. I copied what I could, scanned, archived, backed up to multiple drives just in case. And Mom? She was the easiest to figure out. She had secrets too, of course. A second home in her name upstate, conveniently purchased through a real estate investment fund the family didn't even know existed. I found the deed tucked into a pile of holiday cards she never sent. For a woman obsessed with image, she sure wasn't great at hiding the truth. Every time I uncovered something, it didn't make me feel victorious. It made me sad. Because it confirmed what I'd feared for years. This wasn't a family. It was a performance. And I had been cast as the stagehand. While they played lead roles, soaking in applause for a life built on appearances, I was the one holding up the curtain from behind. But not anymore. I opened a private checking account under my name, transferred what little savings I had. I emailed Gareth and asked him to initiate the paperwork for accessing the trust, but to keep it quiet. For now. He agreed. Discretion is part of the job, he said, and Lorraine was very specific. You move when you're ready. I wasn't quite ready yet, but I was close. I started dressing differently, more structured, more deliberate, less invisible. I even cut my hair, not for them, but for me, to mark the shift, to remind myself that change was no longer a someday thing. I was no longer hoping for recognition. I was preparing for exposure. They had no idea. And that was the point. Let them keep pretending. Let them laugh over brunch and brag on Instagram about how tight-knit we were. Because soon, very soon, the truth would have its moment. And when it did, I wouldn't raise my voice. I'd raise the curtain. The house had never felt smaller. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the weight of everything I now knew pressing against the walls. Or maybe for the first time I was finally seeing things without the filter of loyalty. It was a Tuesday when Vanessa burst through the front door, sunglasses still on, talking loudly on speakerphone about a spa weekend she was planning with friends. She walked right past me in the kitchen, didn't even pause. Just threw her purse on the counter and asked, "Did we ever get those invoices paid? I emailed you last night." There was no, "Hi," no, "How are you?" Just the assumption I was still working for her. For all of them. I smiled politely, said I'd look into it, but what I really wanted to say was, "You're welcome." For everything. The late-night formatting of Dad's reports. The checklists I made for Vanessa's fundraising events she never actually planned. The times I intercepted angry vendor emails Mom forgot to answer. I wanted to say all of it. But I didn't. Because something deeper than anger had started growing in me. Resolve. That night I went for a walk. No headphones. Just the sound of gravel under my shoes and the cool evening air filling my lungs. I passed the elementary school I went to as a kid. The same swing set still stood in the corner of the playground, worn but steady. That's how I felt. Worn, but still standing. I sat on the same park bench Grandma Lorraine used to wait for me on after school. I remembered the way she'd fold her hands in her lap, humming softly, never in a rush. When I asked once why she never seemed angry like other adults, she'd said, "Because anger wastes time, darling, and I'd rather spend mine noticing things." She was the only person who ever truly noticed me. Even now, years after she was gone, she still was. Through every word she left behind, through the will, through Gareth. That kind of love doesn't disappear, it multiplies, it anchors you. And that night on the bench, something clicked into place. I didn't need them to see me anymore. Because I finally saw myself, not as the helper, not as the filler space between their loud lives, but as someone with substance, with proof, with power. I pulled out my phone and typed a single sentence into my notes app. I am no longer waiting to be chosen. It looked small on the screen, but it felt massive in my chest. The next morning, I woke up early, not to make coffee or eggs, but to draft an email. It was addressed to Gareth. Subject line, "I'm ready." I told him to begin the legal process to transfer the assets, quietly but officially. I attached scanned copies of everything I'd found. Dad's hidden accounts, Vanessa's company card statements, the title deed in Mom's name. All of it, neatly labeled, dated, and backed up. His reply came less than an hour later. Understood. We'll proceed as requested. And Ella, your grandmother would be proud. That message sat in my inbox like a stone in a river. Still, unshakable. I closed my laptop and looked at myself in the mirror across the room. For once, I didn't see the girl waiting to be loved. I saw a woman preparing for war, and not with fury, but with precision. Because the most dangerous kind of silence isn't the one that hides. It's the one that gathers. And then strikes. It started with a dinner invitation. Nothing fancy, no holiday, no birthday, no forced celebration. Just a quiet Tuesday evening. I told them I wanted to cook. Said I'd been feeling nostalgic for family time and thought it might be nice to all sit down together, just the four of us. No one suspected a thing. Mom texted back a heart emoji. Dad sent a thumbs up. Vanessa replied with, "As long as it's not that weird lentil thing you made last time?" I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because I had her exactly where I wanted her. Casual, comfortable, unaware. The days leading up to the dinner were filled with strange calm. On the surface, everything looked the same. Dad barked into phone calls about profit margins. Mom reorganized her spice cabinet for the third time this month. Vanessa bragged about some influencer party she got invited to but didn't actually go. Meanwhile, I was prepping in the background. But not just the food. I had documents printed, organized in folders, one for each of them. I even used gold binder clips because if I was going to tear down the illusion they lived in, I might as well do it with class. I set the table like Mom always liked it. Symmetrical napkin folds, polished silverware, wine glasses sparkling under the light. She loved symmetry. It made her feel like everything was under control. Control was about to change hands. That evening they arrived one by one. Mom came in first, commenting on how clean the dining room looked, like it wasn't the same space she passed through every morning. Dad followed, loosening his tie and immediately asking, "What's the occasion?" Vanessa strolled in last, phone in hand, barely looking up. I served roast chicken with rosemary potatoes and a salad that I knew none of them would touch. It didn't matter. The food was just theater. They made small talk, mostly with each other. I didn't say much. I nodded, smiled, let them talk about things that didn't matter. A new neighbor, gas prices, Vanessa's new skincare routine. Then, just as Dad reached for his second glass of wine, I said, "There's something I'd like to talk about." They froze. Even Vanessa looked up from her phone. I slid 3 folders across the table, one to each of them. "I've been doing some reading," I said calmly, "and some listening." Dad opened his folder first. His face changed immediately. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw clenched. "What is this?" he asked, voice tight. "The shell company in the Caymans," I said. "The one you've been using to move Monroe and Company profits. Page 3 has the wire transfers." Mom flipped to hers. Her hands trembled slightly. "The deed to the house in Woodstock," I continued, "bought through a trust no one in this family knew existed, until now." Vanessa laughed, a dry, nervous sound. "Are you serious right now?" she asked. "This feels like some bad TV drama." I turned to her last. "And the corporate card," I said. "You've been using it to fund your lifestyle. I've tracked every charge for the last 10 months, including the Birkin bag you claimed was a gift from a brand. The brand didn't send anything. I called them." Silence. Real, heavy silence. I looked at each of them and saw something new in their eyes. Not confusion, not outrage, fear. I stood slowly. "You've spent years making me feel small, disposable, like I was just lucky to be here. But the truth is, none of this works without me. Not the company, not the house, not the image you all work so hard to protect." Mom opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. "I'm not finished." Dad glared. Vanessa looked stunned. "I'm not here for an apology," I said. "I'm here to let you know the game is over." I reached into my pocket and placed a small flash drive in the center of the table. "That's a backup of everything, including a video you'll want to hear before you say another word." They didn't know it yet, but what they were about to hear would rewrite everything. Dad was the first to speak. Not with an apology, not with surprise, with fury. "You've been spying on your own family?" he said, voice rising. "Digging through documents that don't concern you? What the hell is wrong with you, Ella?" I didn't flinch. I let him shout. Mom, always the diplomat when things got uncomfortable, reached for her wine glass and tried to regain control of the room. "Let's not overreact," she said quietly. "This is clearly a misunderstanding." I looked her straight in the eye. "Which part is the misunderstanding?" I asked. "The shell company, the second house, or Vanessa stealing from the business while being praised for her entrepreneurial instincts?" Vanessa scoffed. "That's rich coming from you," she snapped. "You've been jealous of me your entire life." I let out a short breath. Not quite a laugh. "Jealous? Of what?" I asked. "Of never being held accountable for anything? Of being handed credit for work I did? Of being babied by two parents so obsessed with your spotlight they never noticed the rest of the house was burning?" Her face flushed, but she didn't say anything. Dad slammed his hand on the table. "You don't know what you're talking about. This family, this company, was built on my back. You wouldn't have anything if it weren't for me." I met his gaze, calm, steady. "I'm aware of that. And I'm also aware that Grandma Lorraine was the one who gave you your first loan. The one who vouched for you when the bank wouldn't. She believed in your vision, and in return, you spent years erasing hers." His jaw twitched. "I didn't erase anything," he growled. "She didn't leave the company to you," I said. "She left it to me." For a moment, the entire table went still. Not a fork moved. Not a breath sounded. Mom broke the silence, her voice cold. "You think a piece of paper makes you more deserving?" Lorraine was confused near the end. She was emotional. "No," I said. "She was clear, and she was tired of watching you all pretend I didn't matter." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, Ella, this little crusade is pathetic. You think throwing around a few folders and quotes from a dead woman is going to change anything?" I leaned forward, not to intimidate, but to be heard. "I don't need to change anything. I'm just bringing what already exists into the light." I reached for the flash drive again and held it up. "This," I said, "is her voice. Her final message, unedited, undeniable." Dad shook his head, dismissive. "We're not listening to this circus act." "I think you will," came a new voice from the doorway. We all turned. Gareth Langley stood there in a gray suit, calm and unreadable. I had asked him to wait outside until I gave the signal, but clearly he had heard enough. He walked in slowly, placed a small speaker on the table, and pressed play. Grandma Lorraine's voice filled the room, shaky but strong. "If Ella is hearing this, then you've done what I feared. You've pushed her aside one too many times. You've told her she's less than, invisible, unworthy. But let me be clear. She's the only one who ever asked what was best for this family, not just for herself." The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't tense. It was final. "I've seen how you operate," her voice continued, "and I've chosen who I trust. Not because of sentiment, but because of truth. Ella, this is yours now. They don't get to take it from you." When the recording ended, no one said a word. I looked at each of them and saw something I'd never seen before. Defeat, not because I had yelled louder or played dirtier, but because for once they couldn't lie their way out, and the truth had a voice louder than any of theirs. No one moved. Not a twitch, not a breath. Gareth reached over and calmly pulled out a second folder from his briefcase. It was thick, organized, and wrapped in a red ribbon. I had asked him to bring copies, just in case anyone tried to play the "you made this up" card. "Let's start with financial misconduct," he said, his voice smooth but pointed. "Mr. Monroe, we've traced over $600,000 funneled into an offshore account over the past 3 years, all linked to Monroe & Co.'s General Operations Fund." Dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, mouth tight. "This is a private family matter," he said through his teeth. Gareth didn't blink. "This is a matter of corporate fraud, sir, and the minute Ella assumes her rightful position as majority shareholder, that protection vanishes." Vanessa's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" I turned to her. "You didn't know?" I said. "Grandma made me majority shareholder, 51%, it's already filed. Gareth has the documents." She looked like she'd been slapped. "You're lying." "No," Gareth cut in, "she's not." I let that sink in before moving on. I pulled out a tablet and turned it toward Vanessa. Screenshots, dozens of them. Every online purchase, every suspicious charge, travel, spa weekends, luxury handbags, dinners with friends, subscription boxes she'd marked as client gifts. "All of this," I said, "was charged to the company card, the same card Dad told me was for strictly business needs." Vanessa shook her head, her voice suddenly high and trembling. "That's not fair. You don't understand how much pressure I'm under. Image is everything when you represent the brand. No, I said. Integrity is everything when you represent a business. Her lip curled. She looked to Mom for backup, but Mom wasn't meeting her eyes, because Mom had her own storm coming. I turned to her last. I found the deed, by the way, I said. The upstate house, tucked into a stack of old holiday cards. She froze. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said quickly, but there was a crack in her voice. You bought it under an LLC you created 6 months after Grandma passed. The mortgage is paid through an account linked to Monroe & Company's quarterly marketing budget. You called it retreat expenses. Her eyes narrowed. That home was an investment, she said flatly. No, I replied. It was a secret. And worse, one you funded with money that didn't belong to you. Dad stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. This ends now, he barked. You think you can walk in here with your folders and your lawyer and take control of this family? I stood up too. I don't want control of this family, I said. I want the truth. I want what was mine, and what Grandma made sure couldn't be stolen. Vanessa muttered something under her breath. Mom pressed her fingers to her temples like the headache of a lifetime had just begun. I looked at all of them. My father, who valued power over people. My mother, who cared more about optics than honesty. My sister, who had never worked a real day in her life but still got applauded for existing. I had spent years trying to earn their respect. Now I no longer needed it, because they finally knew what I knew all along, that I was never the weak one. I was the one holding the receipts. Dad was pacing now. His steps were sharp, his breathing tight. You could almost hear the gears grinding in his head, calculating damage control, rehearsing denial, rewriting the narrative in real time. Classic Martin Monroe. You've completely misunderstood everything, he said, voice clipped. Those offshore accounts were part of a risk diversification plan. You have no idea how these things work. I looked him dead in the eye. No, Dad. What I didn't understand, until now, was how far you'd go to protect your ego. He ignored me. He turned to Gareth. And you, he snapped. You're her little puppet now? You're going to let this girl dismantle everything we built over a few pieces of paper and a dead woman's sentimental ramblings? Gareth stayed calm, measured. Mr. Monroe, what your mother left behind was more than sentiment. It's legally binding, and Ella is no longer just the girl. She is the majority shareholder. As of this moment, she has every right to assume full authority. Dad opened his mouth to argue again, but Mom beat him to it. You can't do this, she said, her voice icy. This will ruin us. The family's image, the company's standing, everything we've worked for. I turned to her. You mean everything you built by pretending I didn't exist? Vanessa scoffed, arms crossed. This is pathetic. You think exposing everyone's dirty laundry is going to make you look better? You look petty, like some bitter spinster with a grudge. I smiled. I don't need to look better. I just need the truth to speak louder than the spin. Vanessa leaned in, venom in her voice. You know what I think? I think Grandma left you that stuff because she pitied you. She knew you couldn't survive out in the real world without a safety net. Gareth raised an eyebrow, but I didn't need him to defend me. I stepped forward. No, Vanessa. She left it to me because I was the only one in this family who didn't take without giving back. Who didn't lie or hide or manipulate. I was the one who showed up, even when no one asked me to. Mom tried again, this time with her softer tone, the one she used when speaking to guests or clients. Ella, sweetheart, let's just take a step back. Maybe there's a way we can work this out, quietly. No need for lawyers or press or public fallout. There it was, the fear, not of losing me, but of losing the illusion. I shook my head. You weren't afraid when you cut me out of photos, when you told guests you only had one daughter, when you let Vanessa take credit for reports I wrote, or events I planned, or deals I closed. Her smile cracked. Dad finally stopped pacing. So what now? He asked. You take the company? Kick us out? Replace us with strangers? I looked around the room. You already replaced me, I said. Years ago. I'm just returning the favor, with facts. He stared at me for a long moment, not as a daughter, not even as an opponent, as a threat. I built this name, he said. You think you can wear it better than I did? No, I said quietly. I'm not interested in wearing it. I'm interested in cleaning it. Vanessa stood up, slamming her napkin down. "This is insane. You'll regret this, Ella. No one betrays their own family and walks away clean." Gareth stood too, gathering his files. "She's not betraying her family," he said. "She's protecting the legacy your mother trusted her with. There's a difference." I watched them, my parents and sister, grapple with the unfamiliar feeling of losing control, not because I screamed, but because I finally stopped asking for a seat at the table, and built my own. The room had fallen into a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years, not peaceful, not resolved, just stunned. The kind of stillness that comes right before a storm, when everyone realizes there's no hiding anymore. Gareth reached calmly into his briefcase again, pulled out a small device and set it in the center of the table. He didn't look at anyone as he pressed play. And then, there she was, Grandma Lorraine's voice. We all froze. It was gravelly, older, tinged with weariness, but steady, clear, like she had been waiting for this exact moment. "If you're hearing this," she began, "then my time is up, and so is yours." I glanced up. My father's arms were folded across his chest, but his fingers were drumming against his sleeve. Mom was staring at the table like she could bore a hole through it with her eyes. Vanessa had pulled her phone halfway out of her purse, frozen mid-scroll. "I know what you've done," Lorraine continued, "and what you've failed to do. I watched my son become a man who valued power more than people, a daughter-in-law more invested in mirrors than memories, and a granddaughter so consumed by attention she forgot the meaning of effort." Dad exhaled through his nose. I could see the red climbing up his neck. "And still," she said, softer now, "I waited. I hoped you'd see Ella for who she was, but year after year, I watched you erase her. Not with cruelty, worse, with indifference, and I will not let this family be built on the backs of those we pretend don't matter." Vanessa muttered, "She always loved you more." I didn't turn to her. I didn't need to, because Grandma kept speaking. "Ella," she said, and my name landed like a hand on my shoulder. "If you've found this, then you've found what I left for you. I chose you, not because you're perfect, but because you're honest, because you show up, even when no one thanks you, because you do the right thing even when it's easier to stay silent." The tears I didn't want to cry threatened to rise, but I held them back, not because I wasn't moved, but because I needed to finish this standing tall. "You're not here to punish them," Grandma said. "You're here to break the pattern, to rebuild what they broke." She paused, then added something none of us expected. "And to anyone else listening, let me be clear. Ella is the future of this family. And if you can't follow her lead, then you have no place in the legacy I spent my life building." The recording clicked off. Silence returned. But now it wasn't the quiet of resistance. It was the quiet of reckoning. Dad stood up slowly. His mouth opened like he had something to say, but then closed again. He looked like a man who'd just realized the ground under his feet wasn't concrete, but ice. And it was cracking. Mom picked up her wine glass and set it down without sipping. Her eyes were glassy, but she blinked the emotion away like it was an inconvenience. Vanessa was the only one who reacted like a storm. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "She was senile, she was confused. You all act like she was some kind of saint, but she didn't even understand business. She didn't understand us." I turned to her steady. "She understood enough to leave you out." That silenced her. Gareth began packing up his things. "I believe we're done here," he said, glancing at me for confirmation. I nodded once. Then I looked around the table one last time. My father, speechless. My mother, shrinking. My sister, seething. And me, still standing. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to earn my place. I had claimed it. And more than that, I had protected it. Not just for myself, but for the part of this family that still meant something. The part that never made it to the photos, but built the foundation just the same. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere. Polished floors, harsh lighting, echoes that made every footstep sound like a drumbeat. There was no music, no filtered lens, no curated smiles. Just reality, sharp and waiting. I walked in first with Gareth. I wore a navy suit. Simple, clean lines. No jewelry except the locket Grandma had left me, tucked under my blouse. It wasn't for show. It was armor. The Monroe family arrived 15 minutes later. Vanessa was in all white, as if that could make her look innocent. Mom wore a tailored beige dress and sunglasses, even though we were indoors. Dad, as expected, came in with his chin high and his lawyer even higher. They didn't look at me, not once. We sat on opposite sides of the room, 2 tables, 2 narratives, but only one truth. The judge entered, an older woman with silver hair and eyes that had clearly seen it all. She adjusted her glasses and glanced through the file in front of her like it wasn't the first time a family had tried to tear itself apart in her courtroom. And then we began. Gareth opened with calm precision. He presented the updated will. He detailed the transfer of shares. He explained the existence of the trust fund and how all financial documentation, cross-verified and time-stamped, clearly proved my legal position. When he finished, he stepped back without dramatics. Dad's lawyer stood. He launched into a performance I'd seen rehearsed at our dinner table for years, a script of misguided emotion, questionable mental capacity, family misunderstanding. He spoke of me like I was a confused girl driven by bitterness and jealousy. I didn't flinch. I let him talk, because no amount of acting could change what was already filed, notarized, and backed by bank statements, paper trails, and a recording Grandma made in her clearest voice. Then it was my turn. I stood up, walked to the front of the room, and told the truth. Not just the legal truth, the emotional one. I told them about years of invisibility, about the small cuts that never bled but never healed, about being used and then erased. I showed them the receipts, actual and emotional. The copies of transactions, the screenshots of emails, the events I organized but never got credit for. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because I didn't owe them my pain anymore. On the other side of the room, Vanessa whispered furiously into her attorney's ear. Mom kept adjusting her necklace, eyes darting. Dad looked straight ahead as if staring me down could undo everything I'd built. It couldn't, because this time I wasn't a guest in my own story. I was the author. And the judge was reading every page. When I returned to my seat, Gareth leaned in. "You've already won," he whispered. "Now we just wait for them to catch up." The judge asked for evidence to be submitted. Gareth stood with calm precision and handed the clerk 3 folders, labeled, indexed, color-coded. It was the kind of quiet organization that didn't scream for attention but demanded respect. The first exhibit was the revised will, signed, dated, witnessed, notarized. It listed me, Ella, as the primary heir, with 51% of Monroe and Company, multiple properties, and the trust my grandmother had created specifically to protect me. The second was a forensic audit. Bank transfers from Monroe and Company to a private offshore account linked to my father's alias, an LLC registered in Delaware, masked beneath layers of corporate filings but ultimately traceable. The third was a spreadsheet. My spreadsheet. It detailed every transaction on the corporate card used by Vanessa for personal purchases. Luxury spas, designer clothing, a helicopter tour over Napa Valley, all filed under client development. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffle of paper and the occasional cough. Vanessa was shrinking in her seat now, her arms folded like a shield. Dad's jaw clenched tighter with every new document introduced. Mom, well, she'd stopped pretending to be poised. She stared down at the table like it might crack open and swallow her whole. Then came the moment I'd prepared for. Gareth pressed play on the speaker. Again, my grandmother's voice filled the courtroom. But this time, it wasn't just a letter. It was a confession of trust. If Ella is standing there now, I want the court to know that she was the only person I believed had the integrity to protect what I built. She knows the company better than any of them. She worked without recognition. She never asked for more than fairness. And yet, they gave her less than nothing. The judge didn't blink, but I saw her lips pressed together ever so slightly, an almost imperceptible sign of disapproval, not toward me, toward them. The opposing counsel stood and tried to object, claimed the recording was emotionally manipulative, that it didn't represent legal clarity. Gareth countered instantly. This statement is consistent with the updated legal documents, financial transfers, and corporate decisions made by Lorraine Monroe. The law supports intent, and here we have voice, will, and evidence, all aligned. The judge nodded. Objection overruled. Continue. Their side had no more ground to stand on. Dad requested to make a statement. Permission granted. He stood, straightened his tie, and looked directly at the judge, not at me. My mother was a proud woman, he said, but also a stubborn one. She didn't understand the complexity of modern business. She was emotional, easily swayed. Gareth raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She was also manipulated, Dad continued. Ella had access to her in her final year. We don't know what was said behind closed doors. We don't know what promises were made. My daughter isn't innocent in this. That was the moment I stood again. Your Honor, I said, voice even. If I may respond. The judge nodded once. I turned, not to Dad but to the room. My grandmother was not confused. She was precise. Everything she gave me, she documented. Everything she protected, she explained. And if you're going to accuse me of manipulation, then I would ask you, what do you call decades of silence, erasure, and theft from the very people who claim to love you? I let it hang. The judge adjusted her glasses and turned to the opposing counsel. Do you have any admissible evidence that contradicts the documents or statements presented? The attorney looked at Dad, then at Vanessa, then back at the judge. No, Your Honor. For the first time since this started, I felt the tide shift, not just legally, but emotionally. They weren't untouchable anymore. They were just people. Caught. The judge sat still for a long moment. No one in the courtroom dared to move. You could hear the sound of a page turning as she flipped back through the file, scanning every line like it might reveal one final truth she hadn't seen before. Then she took off her glasses. Her voice, when it came, was calm, measured, but final. This court recognizes the legitimacy of the revised will of Lorraine Monroe. All documents presented have been reviewed, verified, and legally accepted. Effective immediately, Ella Monroe is granted full controlling interest, 51%, in Monroe and Company. I felt my breath catch, but I didn't move. I wasn't ready to celebrate. Not yet. Furthermore, the judge continued, based on the financial misconduct presented in this hearing, the court hereby removes Richard Monroe and Vanessa Monroe from any fiduciary role or decision-making authority within the company. Helena Monroe, given her involvement with unauthorized asset acquisition through corporate funds, will also be excluded from any administrative or advisory position pending further investigation. The room didn't erupt. There was no gasp, no shouting, just silence. The kind of silence that follows something undeniable. Like the moment a jury foreman says guilty, and everyone knows the world just changed. I looked over at them. Dad's face had turned a dull grayish red. He looked like he couldn't decide whether to rage or collapse. Mom still didn't look at me. She stared at the table again, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Maybe she thought if she didn't move, she could wake up and undo it all. And Vanessa. She looked like she didn't understand what just happened. Like this wasn't how her story was supposed to end. As if she were still the star, and this verdict was just a bad plot twist someone else wrote. But it wasn't fiction, it was the truth. And for once, I wasn't on the sidelines watching it happen. I was the reason it was finally being told. Gareth leaned over and whispered, "It's done." I nodded, still not speaking. The judge turned to me one last time. "Miss Monroe, as majority shareholder, it will be your responsibility to guide the company moving forward. This court trusts you will honor both the law and your grandmother's wishes." I stood, hands folded in front of me. "I will, Your Honor." She gave me a small nod, then rose. Court is adjourned. The gavel hit the block, sharp and echoing. It sounded like a door slamming shut, and another one opening. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited, but I didn't stop for them. I wasn't there to feed the headlines. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice. It was about finally being seen, heard, acknowledged. For years, I had walked past boardrooms I wasn't invited to, contributed to projects that carried someone else's name, and sat at dinner tables where I was asked to serve, but not to speak. That ended here. And not because I screamed louder, but because I had the receipts, the facts, and, maybe most importantly, myself. Whole, unshaken, and finally free. I didn't cry until I got home. Not at the courthouse, not in the car. Not when Gareth shook my hand and said I'd done something most people only dream of. Reclaiming what was stolen, not just in dollars, but in dignity. It was when I stepped into the house. The same kitchen where I used to wake before sunrise to scramble eggs and slice fruit no one thanked me for. The same hallway where I used to flatten myself against the wall so Vanessa could glide past in her high heels, phone pressed to her ear, barking orders I had to clean up later. I stood in the doorway and let it hit me. This was mine now, not the house, the moment, the clarity. I wasn't the girl in the shadows anymore. I wasn't the afterthought. I wasn't the silent witness to someone else's show. I was the lead. The next morning, I walked into Monroe & Company not as an assistant, not as a placeholder, but as the majority owner. Some of the employees looked shocked, some gave polite smiles, and some nodded, with something close to relief, because they had seen what I'd seen, the favoritism, the dysfunction, the rot beneath the glossy branding. They'd just never had the power or the safety to say it out loud. I gathered the department heads in the conference room that afternoon. No fancy speech, no theatrics. I just told the truth. "I'm not here to punish anyone," I said. "I'm here to rebuild." I laid out a plan: financial audits, transparent budgeting, clear ethical guidelines, promotions based on merit, not last names. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Good. Discomfort meant things were moving. Later that week, I sat in my grandmother's old office. It had been cleared out years ago, but the window still looked over the city like it used to. Steady. Watchful. I opened the drawer she always kept locked and found an envelope I'd never seen. No address. Just my name. Inside was a single line written in her familiar script. "If they try to push you down, use it as a step up." I closed my eyes and breathed her in. Her strength, her love, her stubbornness. Everything they tried to erase was the very thing that saved me. And now, I was finally ready to live like someone who wasn't afraid anymore. Not of being alone, not of being underestimated, and definitely not of being seen. They called me the quiet one. The helper. The one who never made trouble. But quiet doesn't mean weak. And helping isn't the same as submitting. I didn't destroy them. I simply refused to be invisible any longer. This isn't revenge. This is restoration. The next board meeting was scheduled for Monday. I would be at the head of the table. Not to gloat, to lead. And this time, no one would cut me out of the frame. 6 months later, the company looked nothing like it used to. Neither did I. The old Monroe & Company boardroom, once filled with rehearsed smiles and whispered politics, had been gutted, both literally and figuratively. The long mahogany table was replaced with smaller circular ones. No more hierarchy, just ideas, conversations, actual collaboration. Some executives had resigned, others had been let go, but most stayed. And for the first time in a long time, they didn't look over their shoulders when they spoke. Transparency wasn't just a buzzword in our new mission statement. It was how we operated. Every expense, every decision, every policy, open and accountable. I made it clear that no one was above accountability, not even me. I wasn't trying to be the hero. I just didn't want to be the ghost anymore. We launched a scholarship in Grandma Lorraine's name that fall, funded by the very trust she left behind. Not as a PR stunt, but because I knew she would have done it herself if she had the chance. The scholarship wasn't just for business majors, it was for first-generation students, caretakers. Those who, like me, spent more time helping others than investing in themselves. I still remember the first recipient's letter. "I thought I'd be invisible forever," she wrote. I knew that feeling. And now I was doing something about it. I spent the first few months in my new role drowning in work, not because I had to, but because I needed to prove, mostly to myself, that I belonged in the seat I'd claimed. But over time, something changed. I started sleeping past 6 a.m. I stopped apologizing every time I took a break. I laughed again, the real kind, the kind that makes your ribs hurt, and slowly, I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, because no one was holding it anymore. One afternoon, I visited Grandma's grave. I hadn't been back since the funeral, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to bring her grief. I wanted to bring her something better. I brought her flowers, yellow lilies, her favorite, and I told her everything. About the boardroom, about the scholarship, about the way Mom still hadn't called, and how Dad pretended the court ruling didn't exist, and how Vanessa had moved to Miami and started some vague lifestyle brand that mostly consisted of her posting filtered brunch photos with motivational quotes. I told her I wasn't angry anymore, not at them, not even at myself. I told her I finally understood what she meant when she said silence could be more dangerous than cruelty. That being erased slowly hurts longer than being attacked directly, and I told her that she saved me, not just with the inheritance, with her belief, her quiet rebellion, her faith that someday I'd be ready to fight for myself. Before I left, I read her the line from her last letter one more time. "If they try to push you down, use it as a step up." She wasn't just talking about survival, She was talking about transformation, the kind that doesn't just rebuild a life, it redefines it. I didn't rewrite my story. I remembered who I was before they convinced me I didn't matter, and I gave that version of me a future, not out of revenge, but because she deserved to be seen, to be free, and finally, to be loved. By herself first, and then by the life she chose. It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon when I got the email from my mother. No subject line, just her name. I hovered over it for a full minute before opening it. It was short. Ella, I hope you're well. I was wondering if you'd be open to meeting. There are some things I'd like to say face to face. Just us. No apology, no warmth, just polished restraint. The kind of message you'd send to a colleague you once humiliated and now needed something from. I didn't respond right away. I sat with it. Let it sit with me. A few days later, I agreed to meet her. Not because I needed closure. I'd already found that. But because I wanted to see what she would do with the opportunity to speak when she wasn't the one in control. We met at a small cafe, the kind she used to scoff at when I was younger. Too casual, too plain. She arrived 10 minutes late, wearing sunglasses and a stiff smile. She reached for my hand across the table, but I kept mine wrapped around my cup. She pulled back, flustered. I just want to say, she began, that none of this was ever meant to hurt you. We were trying to do what was best for the family. I waited. No, I'm sorry. No, I was wrong. Just justification dressed up as diplomacy. She talked for a while, trying to sound maternal. She mentioned regret and miscommunication. She said she hoped we could find a path forward. When she finally stopped, I looked her in the eye. You don't need my forgiveness, I said. You need to understand that I'm no longer waiting for it. She blinked, unsure how to respond. I spent most of my life trying to earn something from you that you never intended to give, I said. Respect, attention, basic decency. I thought if I just worked harder, stayed quiet, made things easier, maybe then. I took a breath. But now I know the truth. I don't need to be forgiven for walking away. I needed to walk away to forgive myself. She looked away, down into her untouched tea. I hope someday you'll see that I was doing my best, she whispered. I believe that, I said. But your best wasn't good for me, and I won't make myself small to make you feel better about it. She didn't argue. She just sat there, trying to figure out how her story ended without the redemption arc she'd always expected. When I left, I didn't hug her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about it. Because sometimes healing isn't reconciliation, it's release. The house was quiet that morning. Not the tense, heavy quiet I'd grown up with, the kind laced with unspoken judgments and rehearsed pleasantries. This was a different quiet, peaceful, honest, free. I sat on the balcony with a cup of coffee and let the early sun spill across my face. Below, the city stirred slowly to life. I didn't need to rush anymore. No one was waiting on me to clean up a mess or take notes no one would credit me for. There was only this moment, and it belonged to me. Inside, the old photograph of Grandma Lorraine sat framed on the bookshelf. I'd moved it there myself. No longer hidden in a drawer or left behind in a dusty attic. She was smiling in the picture, half smirk, really. The kind she wore when she knew something others didn't. The kind she wore when she trusted me with her legacy. There was a letter from her I'd kept, one she'd written long before her health declined. I hadn't opened it until everything was over. It had been sitting in the back of her recipe book, tucked behind a stained card for lemon bars. Ella, it began, if you're reading this, it means you didn't give up. That alone makes me proud. But I want more for you than survival. I want joy. I want your own name on the door, your own laughter in the kitchen, your own peace. Let them say what they want. Let them call it ungrateful or cold. But know this. It takes more courage to walk away with your head held high than it does to stay quiet and disappear. I closed the letter gently. I knew now what she meant by peace. Not the absence of conflict. The presence of self. The truth is, I didn't need the company to feel worthy. I didn't need the money. I didn't even need the vindication. What I needed was to believe, fully and completely, that I could trust myself again, that I could walk into a room and not shrink, that I could say no or yes or nothing at all because I chose it, not because someone else decided it for me. That morning, I opened my laptop and typed the first line of something new. Not a resignation, not a lawsuit, just a story, Mine. For once, I wasn't writing reports that would be signed by someone else. I wasn't drafting strategies to be pitched under another name. I was writing my own chapter. I used to think silence was strength, that endurance was enough. But strength is saying the thing that scares you. It's choosing yourself before anyone else gives you permission. And sometimes it's walking away, not to prove a point, but to begin again. This isn't the end of my story. It's just the first page of the life I finally chose. Healing doesn't come in a grand moment. It sneaks in, quietly. Sometimes it looks like a deep breath you didn't know you were holding, or the first morning you wake up and don't check your phone to see if someone finally called to apologize. Sometimes it looks like planting something. That's what I did. A few months after the court case closed and the dust had settled, I started a small garden in the backyard of the house I'd inherited. It was overgrown, neglected, like so many parts of my life had been. But I liked the idea of starting there. Where things had once been left to die, I would bring something back to life. Every Saturday morning, I'd kneel in the dirt with my sleeves rolled up and sun on my back. It didn't matter if it rained the day before or if my hands got scraped. It was mine. All of it. I grew lavender, tomatoes, even tried roses, though they gave me more attitude than beauty for a while. It wasn't about the plants. It was about the quiet, the stillness. The way my hands moved without needing to prove anything. I thought about Grandma often during those mornings. She would have loved that garden. She once told me that the world never gave women like us much space, so we had to grow our own. At the time, I thought she meant in business. Now I knew better. She meant everything. One day, as I pulled weeds by the fence line, a neighbor peeked over. "Didn't that used to be the Monroe place?" she asked, tilting her head. "It still is," I said, smiling. "Just under new management." She chuckled and waved before walking on. I looked back at the rows of green, the bursts of color beginning to bloom. They weren't perfect, some were crooked, a few refused to grow no matter what I did, but they were real. So was I. For so long, my life had been shaped by other people's expectations, their noise, their silence, their version of me. But here, with the soil and sunlight and a second chance, I could finally grow without asking for permission. This wasn't just my garden. It was my return to myself. I bought a new dining table. It wasn't anything fancy, just solid oak, big enough for 8. I found it at a local workshop, handcrafted by a retired carpenter who smiled when I said I didn't want anything polished, just something real. I brought it home myself. No delivery crew, no decorators, just me and the table. For years, I'd been serving meals at other people's tables, setting plates for people who barely looked up, cooking for a family that never asked how I was doing, only why the eggs weren't hot enough. This time, it was my table. My rules. I didn't host some big dinner party right away. That's not how this kind of healing works. You don't replace absence with noise. You let presence build slowly. The first person I invited was Carla, one of the senior accountants who stayed on after the company's transition. She'd once pulled me aside after a tense meeting and said, "You handled that with more grace than they deserved." We had pasta and wine, laughed about all the absurd things we'd seen in boardrooms. We toasted to beginnings, not comebacks. Then came Jordan, the scholarship recipient who reminded me so much of myself it scared me. She was 21, brilliant, and still unsure whether she belonged in any room she walked into. I made her grilled cheese and tomato soup. She said no one had done that for her since her mom died. "I didn't think people like you noticed people like me," she said quietly. "I do," I told her, "because I was you." That night, after she left, I sat alone at the head of the table. No voices pulling me down. No cold stares trying to remind me of my place. Just stillness. And for the first time in a very long time, fullness. Not just in the room, in me. Grandma once told me that a real home doesn't depend on how big the house is or how many chairs are around the table. It's about how seen you feel when you sit down. At this table, there were no invisible people. No one was cut out of the photo. No one had to earn their space. Not even me. I used to think the only way to survive a broken family was to become smaller, quieter, more agreeable. But silence doesn't heal. It hides. And the longer you hide, the easier it is for others to forget you were ever there. I wasn't erased in one day. It happened slowly. Every time I was passed over. Every time I was told I was being too sensitive. Every time I served a meal and was left out of the picture. But healing doesn't happen all at once either. It happens when you reclaim your voice, not to shout, but to speak for yourself. It happens when you stop waiting for permission to take up space. It happens when you stop hoping for an apology and give yourself peace instead. I didn't fight my family to hurt them. I fought to return to myself, and I won't apologize for that. This story isn't just mine. It's for anyone who's ever felt invisible at their own table. Anyone who's been told to stay quiet to keep the peace. Anyone who's been made to believe that loyalty means losing yourself. To you, I say, you're not selfish for leaving what hurt you, you're not ungrateful for wanting more, and you are never too late to begin again. This is not the end, it's the beginning of a life that belongs entirely to you. If this story touched something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, with someone who's still trying to find their way back to themselves. Let me know in the comments what part of this story felt personal to you, and don't forget to subscribe, because we all deserve to be seen, and this space is for stories like yours too.